Welcome to the Financial Freedom Podcast, where we interview remarkable people and share strategies for mastering money and living a meaningful life. With your host, Grant Sabatier, creator of Millennial Money and author of Financial Freedom, a proven path to all the money you will ever need.
This episode is brought to you by PolicyGenius.com. If you have a family that relies on your income, then you should definitely have term life insurance. Unfortunately, less than 10% of millennials have life insurance, and I don't blame them. I've always been personally leery of life insurance salesmen, but thankfully, with companies like Policy Genius, you can compare quotes from the top life insurance companies all in one place. So if you're one of the many people looking to buy life insurance right now, but you're not sure where to start, head to PolicyGenius.com. Policy Genius will help you find the best rate and handle the process completely. They'll get you and your family protected and hopefully give you one less thing to worry about. This episode is also sponsored by DiversiFund. Driven by a mission to help close the wealth gap, DiversiFund is a tech-enabled platform that allows the everyday investor to diversify their portfolios and invest in real estate without needing to be a landlord. With as little as $500, you can be a co-owner in real estate assets that protect your portfolio from market volatility. To learn more, check out DiversiFund.com. DiversiYFund.com. Hey everyone, really excited today to have Steve Adcock, the founder of Think, Save, Retire, which he sold, and one of the 12 people featured in my book, Financial Freedom. So I've been following Steve's journey now for a number of years, and we've had some great conversations over the years about money and life. And he's one of the rare people that I not only follow on social media, but I'm always excited to read what he writes. And within the financial independence space, easily one of the best writers and thinkers, and really excited to have you on the show today, Steve.
Wow, I am so humbled. That's like the best introduction I've ever got. But thank you, Grant, for having me. I really appreciate it.
So let's tell the listeners where you are right now. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Can you give us some context to where you're recording this from?
Yeah, we're literally out in the middle of the Arizona desert. We're about an hour and a half away from Tucson, which is in southern Arizona. The sun's shining, the breezes are nice and light, and there's nobody within, I don't know, probably 5 miles of me right now.
So we're going to get to how you got there eventually, but I want to go back to the beginning of your financial independence journey. For those of you who don't know, Steve reached financial independence around the age of 35 with his wife, Courtney. And throughout that period, spent most of his time working a normal 9-to-5 full-time job. And if you can take us back, Steve, to when did you kind of get that inkling that you wanted to pursue financial independence?
Well, it was the golden handcuffs moment, I think, is when I really started to realize that I needed to make a change. And I'm 38 now, reached FI at 35, and around 30, 31, I would say, is when I began to admit to myself that something was off. So I worked a relatively high-paying job in information technology. Salary was, 100,000, 110,000. So making good money in a relatively low cost of living area. So my life was actually pretty good, especially from all outward appearances. I had the house in the suburbs. I had the Cadillac CTS that I bought brand new right off the line. I had the Corvette. I had the Yamaha R1 race bike. I had all the toys that I thought made me happy. And through my 20s, I basically lived like a rock star. And I guess, looking back on my life, it's easy for me to say, boy, I wish I didn't do that because I would have been even richer now. But really, I'm kind of glad that it worked out that way because I got that out of my system. I don't know what my midlife crisis is going to look like, but I know it's definitely not going to involve a sports car because I've already been there and done that.
So was there a particular day that you remembered being like, gosh, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life? Or, what was that moment like?
Well, I was never really satisfied with my job. I just kept doing it because I made good money, but I never working in information technology that you get paid well, but it tends to drain the life out of you. And nobody calls you to say, "Hey, Steve, I just wanted to let you know that everything is working. You did a
Right.
great job. We're not losing millions of dollars every second. Good on you." No, that doesn't happen. You only get called when something is broken, which something in IT is always broken. It always happens that way. And it's always somebody else's problem that becomes your problem. And over time, that just slowly began to drain on me. And I remember this one Saturday, I walked out into my garage and I reached up to open up the garage door opener, but something stopped me. And I didn't really know what it was at the time, but for whatever reason, I didn't open up that door. Instead, I turned around in the dark and looked at everything that was in my garage. And like I said, I had that CTS, I had that Corvette, I had that race bike. And that was the very first moment where I let myself understand, or at least admit to myself, I guess, that I had all of these toys, I had all the stuff that I ever wanted, but yet I still don't feel satisfied. Something is seriously wrong here, and it shouldn't be. Um, I didn't. I didn't immediately start making changes after that point. It took a long time to make these wholesale, saving money and investing changes. But that was really that first day where I said to myself, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I need to make some changes here.
So looking back on those moments, you just said that you took a little while to start making some saving and investing changes. What did that financial shift look like to you? What were those things that you stopped doing and those things that you started doing that had the biggest impact?
Well, for me, it correlates very closely to marrying my wife. She was also working in IT, so two good IT salaries. And we had a decision to make. We could either live like rock stars and go on expensive vacations, maybe buy a vacation home or go out to nice dinners, things like that. Just live like we made, $1 million a year. Or we can save the vast majority of our money and do what we both actually want to do. And at that time, it was a lot of travel, just seeing the country. So the idea for us is to sell both houses, buy an Airstream RV, and just go traveling for a while. So that was really the goal that we had. So that was having that goal, I think, made it a lot easier for me to start making a lot of these changes. And those changes involved immediately selling my Corvette because that became a money pit. I also sold my race bike and bought a cruiser motorcycle, and my insurance decreased about $115 a month. I guess when you're in your early 30s, people tend to kill themselves on race bikes. So my insurance was outrageous. And we talked about every expense. Our restaurant budget was $50 a month, which pales in comparison to most people's restaurant budgets, including ours now. But we only spent $50 a month. We moved out of my house, or I moved out of my house, rented it for the first year before selling it. And I moved into my wife's house up in Tucson. So those changes really started to set in motion this plan to accumulate as much net worth as we possibly can, as fast as we can, so we can both quit our jobs and pursue a life of travel.
Were there any doubts once you started down that path that, maybe, we're going a little too extreme, or was it just once you made that shift and started going down that path with Courtney, it was just, you were just accumulating and saving and felt pretty committed to the path? Were there any moments where you not regretted it, but maybe you it was tough to kind of keep that focus?
Oh, hell no. It was a done deal. And I mean, for me, it was a little bit easier because I hated my job. I don't like working in corporate America. It just doesn't get along with me. So I I would have retired that day if Courtney let me. Obviously that didn't make sense, so I didn't. But for me, it was all bets are off. I'll do whatever I have to do to stop working full time. And my wife did not hate her job. She liked it for the most part, but she was willing to entertain better offers. And basically, in this case, the better offer was quitting and traveling the country for a living. So she was always sort of on board with this. At least she wasn't against the idea. So for both of us, it makes it way easier to achieve FI, and especially early retirement, if both spouses are on board. If one of them is not on board, it's going to be a lot more difficult. But for us, fortunately, we were definitely both on the same page here.
So then once you reached financial independence, how did you make that decision to pull the plug on the full-time job? I know you said you didn't like it, but the traditional advice we all know is that your 30s and your 40s and even your 50s to some extent, those are your prime earning years. And so you kind of abandoned that trajectory that you were on, having already reached financial independence and likely figuring out that you could live on quite a lot less and having a surplus. But why didn't you hang on maybe another 3 to 5 years to build in enough padding, or another 10 years? Was it that unbearable, or was there just too much life calling you?
Yeah, I think it's a little of both. It was, I mean, there was no satisfaction with my job, and there was a lot of opportunity cost here too, that we considered as well. You're spot on that this was really our main, the main set of years where we would really start to accumulate a lot of net worth. And if I just continued on for 5 years or whatever, then I probably would have another, $500,000, maybe $1 million, I don't know, by now. But for me, it was just a cost benefit analysis here. I didn't like the way, I didn't like my life. I guess I wasn't upset or like incredibly frustrated with my life where I didn't want to go on or something like that. It wasn't that bad, but it just provided no benefit to me. And for us, it was, do we want to spend the next 5 years doing something we don't really enjoy? Or do we want to take that risk? And it was a bit of a risk for us because we retired with less than $1 million, which most people would think is not nearly enough money. But we still took that risk because we wanted to experience the most of what life can provide while we're still young, while we're still energetic. We can go out and do those 10-mile hikes if we want. We may not be able to do that in our 40s or 50s or whatever, but at that time, we could. That was the prime of our active life, as well as the prime of our wealth building life. And we already kind of embraced the wealth building part to a degree. And we both felt it was really time for us to embrace the other side of that, which is the prime of our active life. And we might as well do this while we still can.
So what about your friends and your family and your coworkers? What did they think about your decision?
They were all very supportive. A couple of my friends are in the, make a lot of money and spend a lot of money, I guess, phase of their life, which is fine. But even they were supportive. They wouldn't do this. There's no way they would possibly save all this money and quit their jobs. But they were respectful enough to say, okay, that's cool. If that's what you want to do, then go forth. So I have a very, very positive and supportive set of friends. And my family was the same way. In fact, my dad retired at 49. So he was the first one to really show me that this is possible. I didn't necessarily want to retire at 49 when I first saw him going through that as a college graduate. But really the more I looked at this, the more I looked at the money, the more I looked at what I could be doing outside of an office, man, it just made perfect sense for us.
Is there anything you miss?
I can honestly say I miss nothing about full-time work. There is, maybe, go to restaurants more, have a little bit more money for happy hours, things like that. But that's, that's superficial stuff. I can get over that, and there's ways to get around that. But I can honestly tell you I miss nothing about full-time work.
So one of the biggest benefits of financial independence for me now, is just, I feel like I've grown so much as a human and a thinker. And, I pay attention to things so much more than I used to, not having that money stress or that money worry. I still do a fair amount of work on projects that I care about, but, I feel like having the time and the space for new versions of yourself to show up has been just an incredibly uh, exciting and surprising and somewhat unexpected thing. Can you talk about how you've grown the past 3 years since retiring early?
Yeah, one of the arguments that frustrates me the most about early retirement is people seem to think that if you're not working a full-time job, that you're also not being productive, or you offer nothing to society, or you're basically just sitting on the couch and doing nothing, watching Netflix all day. And that could not be further from the truth. In fact, the younger you are, the more likely it is that you're going to find some purpose in your life that's outside of an office. That could be volunteer work. There could be building houses for Habitat for Humanity. I mean, what volunteering your time at animal shelters, whatever it happens to be, there's so many opportunities for you to, like you said, grow as a person, and you have so much more time to figure out what that looks like. And for me, it's been a freeing experience to be able to get up every morning and know that I could design my day in any way that I want. And for me, it looks a lot like writing. I've really come into my own with writing about this journey and about money and about saving, about financial independence, and putting my story out there, like podcasts, just like yours, Grant, putting my story out there so other people out there can hopefully start to grasp this whole concept of financial independence, and they might even realize that they're closer to it than they think they are, or maybe that it's even possible for them that they may not have thought about before. And the more that this happens, the more outreach I get from my followers. That makes this whole thing so much more worth it, knowing that I'm making a difference, I'm making an impact with those who want to do something like this, whether it's travel or just early retirement. It makes this whole journey that much more worth it.
So what has it been like for you to see the early retirement and the fire movement grow, over the past, 3 to 5 years, and be a part of that journey?
Well, I think I'm certainly heartened with I guess the popularity. That might not be the right word, but it's close enough. The popularity of the fire movement, and I think the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic helped to reinforce. In fact, I don't think that there is a better example of the wisdom behind early retirement and especially financial independence than coronavirus. Because in January and February, our job losses were probably the furthest thing from our mind. None of us were even thinking about that. Everything was going well. The stock market was up. Everybody was making money hand over fist. But this pandemic showed us that things can change on a dime. Things can change literally overnight. And the more financially independent that you are, the more options, the more choices that you're going to have going forward. So when I talk about fire, I never try to push the early retirement part, because that's going to be a very personal decision. If you like what you do, you love your job, that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with loving your job. So the ER part is so completely optional. I don't even like to talk about it all that much. But the financial independence part, the name of your podcast, the financial freedom part, is so important. There's so much wisdom there, because things may not always be so hunky-dory. And the more, the more money we have, the lower cost of our lifestyle, the more options we are going to have, and the better that we're going to be able to tweak our lifestyle so it works the best for us.
So how do you encourage someone who, maybe they feel like they're spending, too much money, or before this pandemic, they felt like they were spending too much money, really, I've seen you write a lot about this, and I know we've talked a little bit about it. In my opinion, that income side of the coin, how much you're earning, is in many cases more important than how much you are saving. Obviously, the differential between the two is extremely important. But for a lot of people who are just kind of starting out, how can they cut back on those expenses? It sounds like you live on very, very little. I've learned how to live on less simply because money started having diminishing returns, and just having the ability to buy something was enough. I don't actually have to go out and buy it. That was a huge shift in my mind. But can you talk about how you found that sort of threshold from a spending perspective in reducing your expenses?
Yeah, a lot of people just focus on income, and income is certainly part of it. But the wealth building equation, and like you said, I write about this a lot, is the concept of building wealth equals your income plus your investments minus your lifestyle. So your income and your investments build wealth, your lifestyle reduces wealth, and whatever is left, that is your net worth. That is how much you are actually worth. And like you were alluding to, income and investments are what most people think about, but lifestyle is something that's often forgotten. And that is something that I really like to encourage people to take a look at, because things drain from your pocketbook and you don't even know them, especially those monthly subscriptions, the magazines that you no longer read. Maybe you have an HBO service through your cable provider, and you don't watch movies. Those things they slowly but surely take away from your net worth, and they add up into something that's really much bigger than a lot of us realize. We have a very unique lifestyle out here because, like you said, we are completely off-grid, 100% off-grid. We have no utility costs whatsoever. We have solar panels on poles outside of our house, so we have a renewable energy system, and completely reliant on those guys. So no power bill, no water bill, no sewer bill. So for us, it's a little bit easier, but then again, we made that choice purposely to reduce our lifestyle in a way where we can spend almost nothing. And by almost nothing, I mean, between 30 and 35 grand a year. So we're not exactly living in a van down by the river. We have a legit house here on 7 acres of land. But because our lifestyle is so minimal, we have a lot more options with how much money we make, how much money we have to make, and still feel like we're living life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. In some cases, I feel like $35,000 is more than $200,000 in a lot of ways. Like, as you start to appreciate money, you realize just how much you can actually buy with $35,000 in most places in this country, and you don't even have to live off the grid. So I haven't announced this yet publicly, but obviously here I am on the podcast. I'm moving from New York City to Ohio, actually, for a couple of years because of my wife's career. And I did the back of the napkin cost estimates, and it's going to be over 80% cheaper for me to live in Ohio than New York City.
Yep.
Which, New York City, I knew it was only going to be for a couple of years, but I was doing the math, and I was like, I'm not going to be financially independent if I live here forever and want to have a kid or two. The numbers just don't net out. They don't work out. So I'm pretty excited to get back to a lower cost of living area, just because there's creep everywhere, even when you're frugal.
That's exactly right. And if you're used to spending 100 grand a year, making an extra $100, that's probably nothing. But what happens when you only spend 30 grand a year? That $100 means so much more to you. And you get to this point where you just don't have to make as much because you're not spending as much. So you have a lot less pressure, a lot less stress, and things, at least in our case, things just become a lot less, I guess, important when it revolves around money than they used to. The more expensive your lifestyle, the more money you have to make, and your cost of living, depending on where you live, like you were saying, really does make a huge impact. And I lived in the Northern Virginia area, I don't know, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, and I made good money there, but the cost of living, just like New York, is so much higher. And even though I had, friends in the area, I chose to move to a lower cost of living area, and that was Tucson, Arizona, to help reduce my lifestyle, reduce my expenses. So I simply did not have to make as much to still feel like I'm being productive and I'm enjoying life. That made a huge, huge difference for me.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about mindset, because one of the things that surprised me the most is I was naturally just like you. Once I was on my financial independence journey, I was so pumped to be saving and making and investing money that became just a huge focus of my life. But one of the things that I've noticed is just how fast our minds can actually adapt. And that's one of the things I hope is a silver lining or a net positive coming out of this pandemic, is that people, obviously we know, have been spending a lot less money, and the savings rate, I think it's increased drastically during this period. And I hope that we've rewired our brains, as a culture, and will naturally continue spending less money coming out of this. But I was just amazed by, once you shift your life. One of the things that happened for me is I started just being less afraid of, taking risks. I started understanding risks more. My relationship with money changed drastically. I felt like $100, was nothing. Now I really value $100. To your point, are there any mindset shifts, things that your thinking has changed over the past few years, and in terms of money or life, or something that you didn't expect?
Well, I like to say money is like my first boss. It is a tool. It is nothing but a tool, and you can use that money to build whatever you want. And if that is such an important mindset shift for me, that money isn't the be all end all. It's not the end result. It's not I just have to earn as much money as I possibly can. If you shift your mind into thinking that money provides you directly with time, that makes everything easier to think about. Money is a representation of time. And if you want to buy a car, for example, just to make the math easy, a $30,000 car, if you ask yourself, okay, is this car worth me working another 5 years or another 10 years in order to fund that? If the answer is yes, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you're wrong if the answer is yes. But the important part here is to understand the trade-off. If that car is worth it, if you want to work an extra 5 years in order to fund it, great, do it. But in my case, once I started thinking about money as a representation of time, I spent so much less money because, like I said before, I did not want to work, and I don't want to go back to work either if things hit the fan. So right now, I really don't have to worry about that. But I that never really, that mindset shift never really relaxed even after we hit FI and retired early. I still have that in my head. If things get bad, is that $10,000 camera really worth it for me? Probably not. Or is this worth it? Is that worth it? Usually the answer is no. Sometimes it's yes, but usually the answer is no. So for me, the most important mindset shift is to think of money as a tool and to think of money as a representation of time. And for me, that made it way easier to really start making some more intelligent decisions about what is an appropriate expense and what is an inappropriate expense.
What inspired you to share your story and to share your strategies, and what have you learned now writing about money for the past 6 years?
Yeah, well, I started the blog as almost like a challenge for myself. I got into this while reading Mr. Money Mustache, just like a lot of other people, and I really connected with him. I really did. It made everything make much more sense. And so for me, I wanted to see if I can do that same thing with a blog. And my purpose behind Think Save Retire at the time was to just start a blog that chronicles my journey, the things that I was doing, the changes that I was making, where I was saving money, where I was investing money, all that good stuff. I put into a blog, and it was just like I said, it was just a challenge for me just to see where it would go. And for whatever reason, people started to read it. Maybe it was because I cursed a lot on the blog or something. I wrote in a very unofficial, non-magazine quality way. And maybe people connected with that. I don't know. But that's really what encouraged me, I think, to continue this whole process of documenting everything that I was doing. I would even publish net worth reports at one point in my blogging life, and monthly income statements. I didn't do that forever, but I just tried these different things, and it really made a lot of sense how all this was coming together. And it wasn't only helping my reader. It was also helping me, because when I sat down to write a post, I really had to think about everything that went into this post. And sometimes I had to do research. Sometimes I had to do this and that, ask my wife, do some math. And that was almost like a meditation for me with every single blog post I wrote, because it really required me to stop. It required me to stop moving so fast and consolidate wisdom into something that makes sense. And for me, that made a huge difference.
And so over the past 6 years, has your relationship with that changed? It sounded like a little earlier you alluded to the fact that you feel like maybe your writing's getting better. Can you talk about how that's how your relationship to it has changed now? You had the blog, you sold the blog, you just recently released an ebook. You've got, I think you made the bold declaration on Twitter that you're going to be like the most valuable personal finance tweeter ever. What can you talk about that journey and where you're at now?
Yeah, so I did the blog thing. It's kind of out of my system. I mean, I still have a blog at steveadcock.us, but it's not like Think Save Retire was. I only write when I want. But the problem here is I want to make this as approachable as possible. And so I was diving through Twitter just, I don't know, a couple months ago. It was really recent. I was diving through Twitter trying to find really good, objective, intelligent Twitter profiles that talk about money. And I was I was so surprised that I just couldn't find a lot of them. Yes, there were some Twitter profiles that talked about money, some of the time. There's a lot of personal finance bloggers out there who maintain Twitter accounts, but they almost never talk about Twitter or never talk about money. So it was way harder than I thought. So it finally started to dawn on me that there's a lot of the lifestyle Twitter accounts or the entrepreneur Twitter accounts or minimalism Twitter accounts, but I couldn't really find one about personal finance. So what if I were to step in and try my best to fill the void? And my goal here is to be the Twitter account that I wanted to find a couple months ago that offers objective tips and techniques that's applicable to everybody. So it's kind of like taking the same wisdom from the blog that I was writing before, but just sharing it on a different medium, which a lot of, money and personal finance folks are on Twitter. So that's a perfect place to do this. And my goal is to just become that source of wisdom that hopefully people will take a lot from, start to make some changes in their life. And that's kind of my new way of getting involved here and making an impact.
So, I just want to sort of end on just a couple quick questions around the lifestyle that you're living today, which by many measures is quite unconventional, but seems to make you super happy, man. Like I see you fiddling with your drone, and you get these drone shots, and your cameras, and your landscaping, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, but you seem to be having a ball. Can you talk about how you've built a life you love?
Yeah, this is why we put in the work to achieve financial independence and early retirement, so we can do these. We can live wherever we want and to have fun and just do whatever makes us happy. And that's what that's what we've done out here. We like land, and especially now, I have never been so thankful to live outside of a major city. No offense, of course. I know you're in New York, but it is just seeing for hundreds of miles in every direction, which is what you get out here in the West. That's really what we enjoy. And with the money that we are making through like side hustles and things like that, yeah, we have a little bit extra for like happy hours and camera equipment and things like that, and that's what makes me happy. And over time, to build this lifestyle that that's we feel productive in and brings us happiness, that doesn't come overnight. For us especially, it was an incremental change. We tried a lot of different things. A lot of different things didn't work out, but some things do. We used to travel full time, for example. Now we travel about half the time. This year we're not traveling at all because it's not a conducive time to take the Airstream out. But I think the key to maintaining a lifestyle of happiness is to be honest with yourself about what's working and what isn't, and also be flexible enough just to try new stuff and see what happens. And the things that don't work doesn't necessarily mean that it failed or you failed. It just means it didn't work for your life. And so you just move on to something else and see if that works. But that iterative process, if you continue going through that, you are going to find that sweet spot where you have the things that make you happy, you have the routine that makes you happy, and you have everybody around you that makes you happy. And that, to me, is the spice of life.
What about being on the road? So I was only, I did 13,000 miles last year on the book tour, and, loved so much about the road. What have you learned traveling? Now you don't do it full time, but going from place to place, what does that mean to you?
Well, I learned a lot about how different people live. When we grow up in big cities, or when we grow up out in the country, you start to get a feel for, this is the way it is in the US. This is how people live. But that's not necessarily the case. We've been to huge metropolitan areas like Minneapolis and New York, actually. But we've also been to towns that we might expect in a third world country, to be perfectly honest with you, and everything in between. So the travel really opened up my eyes to what's happening in the United States, and it's very, very based on location. But the magical thing about this, the best thing that I was able to find in these, all these different ways of life, is people who are making millions of dollars a year and living in penthouses. They may be happy, but they may not be. They may be stressed. They may always be looking for that next paycheck or that next way to make money. But these people who have almost nothing out in the country, they are some of the happiest people I have ever met. They are so content with what they have. They're not looking for that next thing. They're not looking, they are just immediately focused on their day-to-day life. And that, seeing that with my own two eyes, that was such a magical experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good way to put it. It seems now, having lived in New York City and also having traveled, a bit across the country, it seems like a lot of people who have less are more present in their life. A, because they need to be in a lot of cases, but
Sure.
B, they've got their priorities straight. Where you're absolutely right. Most people in the United States have very little money and live on very little, and certainly that's extremely stressful and extremely difficult, while at the same time it seems like certainly in the media, or unless you go out and experience it for yourself and meet people who are living different lifestyles than you, it's so easy to assume that just everyone is doing that sort of 9 to 5, suburban grind.
Oh,
uh,
that's right. And it might be hard to understand why somebody would ever live out in the country or somebody would ever live in the big city if you are only used to one or the other. But I think the more we get out, the more we see and more we experience, I think the easier it's going to be to realize that, you know what? We're not all the same. We all like different things. Our histories influence our perception of life so significantly. And I think, the more news we watch, the 24-hour news cycle, it drains on a lot of our psyches. I no longer do that. The news that I have to hear, I tend to hear whether I watch the news or not. So all of that perception based on our upbringing and where we live, that has such an impact on our outlook on life. And the more we see, I think the more well-rounded we become.
Yeah, we're changing and we're changing in every moment. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
I like how you distinctly said we were in the active phase or we were in this phase. And you're absolutely right. Like the things you love today, you might not love tomorrow. And financial independence, financial freedom is about setting yourself up so if you do change, your desires change, you have the freedom to pursue them or grow or change. And I want to end on this question. So, what's next, man? 38, living the dream out in the desert, beautiful morning. You get to write and inspire others and create and travel and live this life that you really love. What are you most excited about in the future?
The real answer to that question, the what's next, is I have no earthly idea. And that is part of why I like this so much, because we don't know necessarily what's coming. And that's to us, that's a little bit invigorating. We don't necessarily need to plan our day, our week, our month, our year. We don't need to do that. And that's part of the benefit of financial independence. You just don't have to necessarily always have a plan. That said, we do want to do more international travel in the future, especially when we no longer have our two dogs. But other than that, there's what comes, is what comes. That's really the best answer to that. It's really a non-answer, but it's the right answer for our life.
Absolutely. Just living, being alive.
Exactly. Living every moment, taking every day as it comes. That's the way that I really enjoy living life.
Hey, Steve, it's just been a real pleasure to spend this time with you, and thanks for sharing your story and your inspiration. And you have you have this real talent for the hope that you infuse in your writing, and just chatting with you now. Financial independence is accessible. It is available to so many more people than they often realize, and it does take time and it takes hard work, but that freedom is available to so many. And so thanks for doing what you do. It's been fun to be on this journey with you, and to follow you from afar, and look forward to staying in touch. And where can everyone find you?
Well, thanks for having me, Grant. I write online at steveadcock.us. I'm on Twitter very, very often. My Twitter handle is Steve on Speed, all one word. And the on speed part came from when I drove the Corvette. and I was addicted to fast cars and things like that. So that's kind of where that came from. And yeah, those are the two main questions. If you have any questions or comments or hate or something, hit me up on Twitter. I will certainly be there.
Have a great day. Thanks, man.
Thanks, you too, Grant.
This episode is brought to you by PolicyGenius.com. If you have a family that relies on your income, then you should definitely have term life insurance. Unfortunately, less than 10% of millennials have life insurance, and I don't blame them. I've always been personally leery of life insurance salesmen, but thankfully, with companies like Policy Genius, you can compare quotes from the top life insurance companies all in one place. So if you're one of the many people looking to buy life insurance right now, but you're not sure where to start, head to PolicyGenius.com. Policy Genius will help you find the best rate and handle the process completely. They'll get you and your family protected and hopefully give you one less thing to worry about. This episode is also sponsored by DiversiFund. Driven by a mission to help close the wealth gap, DiversiFund is a tech-enabled platform that allows the everyday investor to diversify their portfolios and invest in real estate without needing to be a landlord. With as little as $500, you can be a co-owner in real estate assets that protect your portfolio from market volatility. To learn more, check out DiversiFund.com. DiversyFund.com.